80s horror franchises that redefined the genre. Ah, the good old days of the 80s. People could get away with so much cheesy stuff in the movies, and B-movies enjoyed a golden era. It seems like another world today, but back then it was so much fun to just put the critic's hat away for a while and enjoy movies without judging them. Every random thing wasn't considered offensive, and the horror fans enjoyed a dream run because it was an amazing decade in terms of the sheer quantity of horror movies that were released. The popular ones among these horror flicks spawned sequels faster than you could count one Mississippi. And over time, this became known as the era of horror franchises. From remakes to reboots, the 80s delivered some of the finest classics that are loved even today. In this video, we will turn back the clock and revisit some of the genre-filling horror franchises that flourished back then. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. There was once a murderous psychopath named Freddy Krueger who killed several children with a glove that was fitted with razor blades. After the judge set him free, the angry parents burned him alive. However, this was not the end of his terror reign, but only the beginning. After a few years, the children of those responsible for killing Freddy started having recurring nightmares that involved a burned man wearing a glove with razor blades on the fingers. Nancy is one of those having such nightmares, and when some others begin to die under mysterious circumstances, she realizes that there is something fishy about the man in the dreams. Can she stay awake long enough to draw out the psycho killer into the real world? Such was the premise, and Wes Craven was the director. The rest, they say, is history. New Line Cinema was on the verge of bankruptcy before they took one last risk with this movie. The original film was such a success that their finances turned a new leaf and they were nicknamed the house that Freddy built. The opening weekend was enough to make the money back, and the rest were simply massive profits. It was a horror classic with an original concept of a serial killer stalking victims in their dreams. The performance by Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger was iconic, and the likes of Johnny Depp made their presence felt. The movie was atmospheric and engaging, and there are some scenes shocking enough to make your heart pound harder. The popularity of the movie ensured 4 sequels in the 80s, and another 4 were made later. However, the brilliance of the original could never be recreated in the later stories. Friday the 13th, 1980. In a way, Friday the 13th ushered in the flavor of horror for the 80s, and the first movie took a rather common theme and made it something extraordinary. This is when we were first introduced to the notorious campsite called Crystal Lake. Back in 1957, a boy named Jason drowned in a lake, and a year later, 2 of the camp counselors were mysteriously murdered. When the camp is reopened after several years, in spite of the warnings of an old man, the same sequence of events repeat itself. The grim past is revisited as a mysterious killer seems to take down victims one after another. Who is this brutal killer, and who will survive his onslaught? If you learned about the ways most of the horror flicks were made in the 80s, you would be surprised that they did so well. Cast members of Friday the 13th stayed in local hotels, and some even stayed in the campsite in New Jersey where they filmed the movie. The budget wouldn't get you a stunt team in today's time, and yet the movie was a smashing hit that shattered many records back in the day. It kickstarted the horror phenomenon in the 80s, and it became one of the most influential horror flicks with several sequels spawning from its success. The special effects looked way too posh for the budget, and the new faces in the cast delivered what was asked of them. This was the first appearance of the sadistic and vengeful killer Jason Voorhees, and the entertainment value compensated for the generic narrative. There were around 11 sequels to the original, and while there were some hits and misses, there was no denying the craze surrounding the franchise. Poltergeist, 1982. A haunted house is one of the commonest themes for a horror movie, but Tobe Hooper made sure that the poltergeist was a unique addition to the premise. A typical suburban family is haunted by the presence of a demonic ghost in their house. The paranormal presence seemed rather innocent at first, moving objects around the house and not really threatening anyone. However, things get serious very fast when the youngest daughter of the family simply vanishes into thin air. A team of paranormal investigators move in to investigate the events, and the true evil nature of the demonic forces in the house is revealed. Steven Spielberg was mightily impressed with Tobe Hooper's work in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and he hired him for the project. However, there are some rumors that suggest Spielberg took over the director duties quite often for the movie. In all fairness, some parts of the movie do seem like the handwork of Steven Spielberg. Either way, the end result of this Spielberg-produced horror flick was mind-blowing. Yes, the film is largely dependent on a typical Hollywood-style spectacle, but the creepy build-up and the realistic storyline worked efficiently. Heather O'Rourke is one of the highlights among the cast members, and she essayed the role of a troubled young girl effortlessly. The ghosts shown in the movie are more fascinating than scary, and the special effects are also quite impressive. 2 sequels followed in the 80s, and another one was released in 2015. The follow-ups were not quite as jaw-dropping as the original, but they did decent business because the legacy of the franchise was a brand in itself. Hellraiser, 1987. The first Hellraiser movie was released towards the later part of the 80s, and it shocked the horror fans with its gruesome content. The shock factor was not necessarily in the gore, but the strange new kind of evil entities that were portrayed, the Cenobites. The story revolves around a man and his wife who move into an old house. It turns out that the man's half-brother, who also happened to be his wife's former lover, existed in the house in a partially formed state. The wife started to bring him human sacrifices, which helped him complete his body, but there are some demonic beings that are pursuing him from escaping their sadistic world. The Cenobites, led by Pinhead, stalk their prey, and Kirsty Lawrence, the daughter of the clueless man, finds a way to negotiate with the otherworldly creatures. We don't know whom to appreciate more, Clive Barker, the writer and director, or Doug Bradley, the man who redefined the idea of a horror villain with his portrayal of Pinhead. His performance added a new dimension to this awesome movie, and he was so caught up in the role under all that makeup that he did not realize that most of his crew did not recognize him in real life. The budgetary allowance was rather limited, and by the end of the movie, the quality of the special effects dips significantly. Even with such shortcomings, the film is regarded as a horror classic, and it went on to spawn a successful franchise. The list of 4 films and 6 straight-to-home video movies is a long one, and some of these efforts actually lived up to the glorious days of the original. The concept of the Cenobites certainly struck a chord with the audience, and these former humans turned into monstrous, sadistic creatures of hell became a phenomenon in pop culture. If you haven't watched a Hellraiser movie yet, you don't know what you are missing out on. Demons, 1985. Italian horror and Dario Argento go hand in hand, and Demons was a project produced by this veteran filmmaker. The movie surprised the audience with a bizarre storyline where a group of people are invited to the opening of a new movie theater. A horror flick is being shown on the screen, and it starts to get significantly more violent with time. Suddenly, some members of the audience starts to transform into bloodthirsty demons, and the others are stuck in a hellish situation, struggling to survive. The entire theater is transformed into a gory carnival, and you will watch in horror as you witness the slaughter unfold before you. If you can handle some serious violence and gore, this movie will be right up your alley. This trash classic is an Italian horror cinema at its finest, and the film launches a visceral assault on your senses right from the word go. After a brief build-up, the narrative heats up to scenes that are morbid and gruesome, and the boundaries are certainly pushed with this effort. From eyeballs being ripped out to necks being snapped to decapitations, there is nothing that the gore fest doesn't show. The narrative is set in one location, and the claustrophobic fear that it includes in the viewer works wonders for the movie. The story is fast-paced, and you will get no time to look away as the mayhem takes place. It had a sequel released shortly after the original, and later, another sequel was rewritten and released titled The Church. Is this an intelligent film made to be a work of art? It certainly isn't, but for those who are looking for a night of mindless entertainment, this can be just the right movie to tune into. Halloween, 1978. Many of you must be wondering what Halloween is doing in this list because the first Halloween film came out back in 1978. However, John Carpenter's seminal slasher series actually became a full-blown franchise in the 80s when the sequels kept coming one after another. We wouldn't say that all of them were up to the standard, but between the horror fans, no one was keeping account. The events of the original movie give you a spine-chilling prologue where a 6-year-old boy named Michael Myers murders his elder sister on Halloween night. After being locked away for 15 years, he breaks free while being transferred for a court date. He comes back to his old town, and it is about to be another murderous Halloween night after all these years. John Carpenter was a huge fan of Alfred Hitchcock, and this film was his tribute to the maestro filmmaker. However, he did not have the blessing of a decent budget, and the filming process had to be wrapped up within a meager $300,000. It soon set the box office on fire with almost $47 million in revenue. Apparently, when he was in college, John Carpenter visited a psychiatric hospital and met a child who had a bone-chilling stare. This inspired him to frame the character of Michael Myers, and together with his creepy mask and ridiculous mannerisms, he became a classic horror villain. The cast was put together nicely, and the likes of Jamie Lee Curtis impressed us with their performances. The success prompted a series of sequels and reboots, and the Halloween franchise comprised 13 movies altogether, with the latest releasing last year. Yes, most of the sequels aren't half as good as the original, but it became a brand that horror fans cherished. The Evil Dead, 1981. Ash and his girlfriend Linda head into the woods with 3 other friends to spend a vacation in a remote cabin. They find the place to be surprisingly in a good shape, and after exploring the cabin, they find a strange book and tape recordings in the basement. When they make the mistake of reading out from the evil text, they release a malevolent force that is dedicated towards killing them all. One by one, they are possessed, and finally, it is up to one last survivor in his efforts to escape from this sinister place. Sometimes, classics have an unsaid story behind them that very few remember. The Evil Dead wouldn't have been possible without many such unspoken sacrifices by the cast and crew, and a particularly astonishing support from Bruce Campbell. After the director ran out of money halfway through the movie, Bruce put up his family property as collateral so that Sam Raimi could finish shooting for the movie, and this made the director so grateful that he credited Bruce as a co-producer. The miserable budget meant that many crew members lived in the cabin, which was used as the film set. It came down to the point where they had to burn furniture to stay warm. Finally, all these efforts bore fruit, and the movie went on to become a cult classic in horror cinema. The plot is not exactly the deepest or most unique, but the gore level is simply off the charts. At times, things get so over the top that you will be in a shock to think that this could actually be released for the public. The blood never really stops flowing, and this film thrives on extreme violence. There is a comical side to the narrative that people appreciate, and this really is independent raw filmmaking at its finest. The acting is not refined, but trust us when we say that you wouldn't be looking for acting skills in the first place. It went on to become a franchise with 4 feature films and a television series, and Evil Dead Rise is an upcoming addition to the series that still has a lot of hype around it. Gremlins, 1984. Creature horror was one of the salient features of 80s cinema, and Gremlins was the cherry on the top. The original movie told the story of Billy, a young boy who gets an adorable furry pet called Mogwai from his father. However, the creature came with some warnings, and the owner was never supposed to violate some of the fundamental guidelines of owning it. Billy, of course, is not the most responsible kid in town, and he completely disregards the guidelines. The Mogwai has to be kept away from bright light, never be fed after midnight, and never be made wet. When the rules are broken, all hell breaks loose, and the town witnesses an insane level of distraction. Some terrifying, minuscule creatures are spawned, and the terrible reign of the Gremlins begin. The director Joe Dante rates Gremlins 2 as superior to the original, but we find both equally exhilarating. It is hard to believe that the film was shot on the backlot of the studio and there was no budget for extravagant special effects. Even then, the movie looks appealing and the silly storyline is handled with care to deliver maximum entertainment. The greatest success of Gremlins was how it managed to engage both comedy and horror elements through the narrative. The direction is efficient and it is helped by a funny and inventive script. One of the highlights of the movie would have to be the cute creatures and some ugly, green, and slimy gremlins later on. In a way, this film is a homage to early monster movies, and it certainly left a lasting impact on the minds of the audience. It was followed by a sequel titled Gremlins 2: The New Batch, and it is one of the better sequels that you will come across. An animated Gremlins series is supposed to be one of the eagerly awaited upcoming projects, and it might be a good idea to revisit the old ones before it releases. Child's Play, 1988. Welcome to the notorious world of Chucky, who is a dreaded serial killer with knowledge of voodoo rituals. This allows him to escape death every now and then, and he can transfer his soul into a doll. During one such tricky situation, when he was being chased by a cop, the serial killer shifts his soul into a doll named Chucky. Soon, a young boy becomes the owner of this possessed doll. The killer has no intentions of stopping his killing spree, and no one believes the little boy about the haunted doll until it is too late. Now, the child's mother and the young boy must fight for their lives against a sinister, malevolent spirit. The movie had to brush aside some controversies because some people claimed that the concept would incite violence in young boys and girls. However, from an entertainment point of view, this is an absolutely flawless effort. It is surprisingly creative and genuinely scary at times. Visually, the movie is slick and suitably ominous, and the special effects are nicely handled as well. The script has some witty moments, and the sarcastic one-liners offer some comic relief amidst all the terrifying stuff. The director handles the old idea of a serial killer doll with some innovative freshness, and the narrative never seems dull. Some of the kill scenes are a bit too unsettling, and the movie is atmospheric from the very beginning. The franchise grew bigger than anyone ever imagined. As of today, Child's Play has 6 sequels, a TV series, a remake, and even video game and comic books. Chucky became one of the most popular horror icons, and merchandise, especially the dolls, sold like hotcakes. With time, the film became more and more creepy in nature, but the second and fourth movies were worth the legacy of the series. Predator, 1987. The 80s were known for their unique brand of horror movies, and it was also known for Arnold Schwarzenegger blowing our minds with some kick-ass performances. Predator happens to be one such sci-fi horror flick that has the muscular hero in the lead, and he is up against one of the deadliest enemies in fiction. The story follows a rather simplistic premise where a team of Special Force commandos is out in a Central American jungle on a rescue mission. However, they soon discover that their mission has a far greater headache, as an extraterrestrial warrior seems to be stalking them meticulously. One by one, the members are methodically hunted by this strange alien hunter who seems to be way too advanced for the primitive weapons of the commandos. Is there a way to defeat this invincible predator and get out of the forest alive? These were the good old times, when the actors actually took the trouble of shooting in real locations and facing the hostilities of the environment for the sake of the movie. For this movie, the cast and crew had to deal with leeches, reptiles, and other creepy crawlies. Besides, the weather conditions were extreme, and it was either too hot and humid or too cold. The effort certainly paid off because this film became one of the timeless classics that set new standards for the sci-fi horror genre. The suspense was uncanny, and even with a simplistic plot, every scene was well planned out for the powerful impact. The effects are out of this world, especially for the times, and Stan Winston deserves all the credit for his hard work. To add to things, you get some mind-blowing action scenes and some gory bits to please the gorehounds. The brand value of the Predator franchise needs no introduction. It has spawned 3 direct sequels, and an upcoming prequel is creating quite a buzz. Besides, there have been novels, video games, comic books, and an entire universe of Predator-related stuff. The 80s were indeed magical times, and there are many other amazing horror franchises apart from the ones we explored. Do let us know in the comments below which one is your favorite from the golden era of horror cinema. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.